Okay, welcome everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce Christina, who's here from Raytheon. She has an illustrious past. I'd say she has a bachelor's in Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, and then a master's in interdisciplinary engineering from Purdue. So she's coming back as a Boilermaker, but also a master's in systems engineering from Johns Hopkins. So she has very different kinds of experiences, and she's worked in several roles through her career, which gives us an interesting diversity to talk about. And today she will introduce DoD cyber requirements and directives. And I hope we get a lot of interactivity here. So please take it away.
Thank you. So again, my name is Christina Ledesma. I work for Raytheon down the road in Indianapolis, Raytheon IIS. And I guess the topic for today is the cybersecurity operational test and evaluation. I'm just going to, full disclosure, I'm not going to be following slides. I'll be going off my notes. So I hope it doesn't sound too jumbled and it's organized enough to get notes for yourself. Just a little anecdote, this is actually my second day in a row up here on campus. So yesterday I was here with my daughter doing a campus visit. So hopefully pretty soon I either have a Boilermaker or a Hoosier, whatever she decides. So the itinerary for today, I'm just going to go through an introduction, introduce myself, give a little bit more detail into my background. Then we'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity and industry overview, kind of why it's important that you guys are here studying what you're studying. And then just the DoD industry overview, kind of what me and my counterparts do as part of a cybersecurity team in Indianapolis or within Raytheon in general. And then I'll go into the topic of discussion, which will be operational test and evaluation. I'll start off with an overview of the Systems V, which is what we follow for our product life cycle to make sure that we can deliver a product that is ready for operational test and evaluation. And then I'll just close and you guys can go home and start studying for finals. So I understand it is dead week. So who am I? Like he said, I am a Purdue alum. I was here, I graduated before the turn of the century. That sounds like a long time ago. It doesn't seem that long ago for me. So I did study electrical engineering. And basically that degree enabled me to develop a love for learning. So, later on as I was working, I kind of had an epiphany that I wanted to go into operations. Because I was working in an industry where I wanted to be on the product line. So I went back and I got a master's degree in interdisciplinary engineering, and I focused on material handling and graduated in 2007. I never got to use that degree because shortly thereafter I changed industries within which I worked. So, but I did continue learning, and then I realized that there is a way to get a degree in what I was doing at that time. So while I was working, I was able to obtain a master's in science through Johns Hopkins in systems engineering. Completed that in 2013. So don't know what I'm going to study next, if anything, because now I've got kids to put through college. So my work experience kind of lends itself to today's topic, which is test, because coming out of school here at Purdue, I went and worked for Motorola in the telecommunications industry. At that point, I was testing the software that we were putting on our base transceiver stations. You guys refer to them as towers, when you drop your calls. That's because someone might not have tested the software very well. I don't work there anymore, so it's not my fault. Didn't spend too much time at Motorola. I went to go work in R&D for General Motors on hybrid technology. And that hybrid technology was the technology we were putting in buses, metro buses that you would see across major cities like Washington, D.C. And basically in that particular location, I was able to work on simulations, develop algorithms, do some diagnostic codes that would be popping up if we ever hit a failure situation, as well as oil level sensor data collection, which did a whole lot of stuff, and I even got to enjoy a little bit of field engineering, which is a little bit overrated sometimes, all the travel you do, but you definitely learn a lot while you do it. On a personal level, I'm married. I have 3 kids, 2 teenagers, and a little 11-year-old. I have a dog that weighs more than I do, but I love him to death. And then in my free time, what I've been doing is brainwashing my children to see their future in a STEM career, regardless of what their age is. So that's just a little bit about me. Just want to talk to you guys a little bit about the industry, cybersecurity, and how it's important and why it's important. Basically, if you think about the evolving technologies we have a huge growing attack surface. So when you think of medical, one of the considerations is that we have legacy and obsolete software and hardware, and these are connected to systems that are both large and smaller that are connected to larger systems. So it just provides a huge attack surface that needs to be protected in some manner. And just a interesting little anecdote is 3 out of 4 hospitals do not have a designated IT security professional. So the industry is wide open in that regard. And one of the reasons the medical industry has certain security issues is because they're dealing with personal information, and your medical history is pretty permanent. You can't change history. Well, people try to, but that medical history can be replicated, duplicated, and stolen for whatever nefarious reasons people have. So the other aspect of the medical field is they have all these open live portals where you can access your own. So there you go, you have another attack vector. In the education, you guys are familiar with higher education, there's Wi-Fi everywhere, there's computers everywhere. So the attack surface here, at a university of 40,000 students must be tremendous. So taking that into consideration, your guys' IT professionals are probably pretty busy with securing this particular location. A little anecdote with regard to something I've experienced at a personal level. My son had a classmate who was suspended within the past year for doing a little bit of mischievous hacking into their elementary school. So education is, maybe not as secure as we expect it to be. For law enforcement, the smaller departments have smaller budgets, so they may not be able to employ security professionals as well. And the consideration must be given to the fact that they need to be protecting victims' data, as well as all the other data records that they're maintaining, both long-term and short-term. So, moving on into banking, like I talked about patients, banking has a lot of portals for customers to be accessing all the assets or whatever is within the system. So the attack surface is opened up just based on the fact that they've given their customers access to their own accounts through the web portals. And then government, we can think of nation states like Korea, Iran, and then China and Russia, because one of the new areas is cyber warfare. So depending on who are your friends or your foes, your government can be an attack surface. And then into automotive, you think about all the technology that is included in the vehicles that are being developed. We now have Wi-Fi in our cars, we're connecting via Bluetooth, and if you think about your vehicle, it's a couple thousand pounds, and if it can be weaponized through someone hacking into it, you've just created, potential for a lot of weapons floating around. So just to go into the DoD industry and kind of what we do within maybe DoD, Raytheon, and some of our other competitors. So one of the activities that we participate in, cyber-related, is all of the products that we produce. We are basically conducting a cybersecurity vulnerability maintenance cycle, and that's where we're just patching and making sure that our products have the most secure posture as possible, and we do this on a regular basis. The other activity that is done by myself and my counterparts would be RMF, which is the Risk Management Framework. And basically this is done so that the products that we're developing for our customers can obtain an authorization to operate in the military and tactical environments. And it's a 6-step process, and it starts with categorizing the system and making sure you understand what the system is that you're building or the product. It can be as small as an e-board, it could be a network, but just making sure that it can meet in the end result, it can meet whatever the mission is. So you start by categorizing. Then you select all the controls that you're going to say that the system has is going to be abiding by. And then you implement those controls and you assess them and you make sure that you're meeting those controls. And you may have to do a few iterations between implement and assess because you might not get it right the first time, or you might find more information as you're going through the process. And then just basically at that point, you get the authorization and you work through that. Step 6 is the monitor, which comes into that CVM cycle I mentioned that we do before, which is maintaining the security posture and minimizing the risk. So there's also red team, blue team activities that happen, not necessarily at my particular site, but I think within cybersecurity for DoD. And I think you guys are probably familiar with red team and blue team. It's the offensive, defensive, and within the system. We also do penetration testing. This is being added to our repertoire in Indy, and is basically you're just determining the strengths and the weaknesses of the system that you're working on. You guys have probably heard of anti-tamper, and that's basically it is protecting the intellectual property, and not everybody has some sort of intellectual property, but it is definitely a consideration for anybody who's working in any cybersecurity field. So we do the analysis to see if it is applicable to the products that we're working on. So within DoD, there's DoD 8570, and the long and short of it states that if you are any kind of personnel that has access to, privileged access to any system that's going to be delivered to a DoD customer, that you have to have some sort of certification. And in some cases, you have time to get it before the contract takes full effect. But I can tell you with my cohorts in Indianapolis, majority are either CISSP or Security Plus. So just taking that into consideration, you guys might want to start looking at that as far as when you start your careers. Certifications sometimes work a little bit better than the letters at the end of your name as well. So I guess we're going to get a little bit into what I call the Systems V. And the reason this is important is because as we look forward to operational test and evaluation, the reason you are working in the Systems V is because that's your development life cycle, and that feeds the operational test and evaluation. And the reason you're doing an operational test and evaluation on a system is because you're trying to get to a point where you have approval to go into full production and deploy that system. So the Systems V has a left side, a right side, and a bottom. On the left side, it's where we will start with the CONOPS, and it's at the top. If you can picture the V, it starts at the top, and developing the CONOPS and evaluating what your mission threads are as you go forward. From the left side of the V, everything can trace to the right side. So at the CONOPS level, you also need to be considering and thinking about the system validation plan, because the right side of the V is actually your integration and test side. So everything kind of flows back and forth, and you have to consider both sides at the same time. So going from the CONOPS, and you're dealing with and identifying your how the system is going to be used with your CONOPS and your mission threads and your use cases. From that, you can develop your requirements. So the requirements need to be developed in terms of thinking about the verification methods as well, because when you define the requirements, you have to give additional information for the rationale as well as how you foresee that particular requirement being developed. So just backtracking to CONOPS, when you're thinking about how something's being operated, you also need to take into consideration the cybersecurity effects on it and any attack vectors. So if you have a mission thread that has a possible...
You might want to tell folks what CONOPS means.
Oh, that's a good point. So CONOPS is a concept of operations. Sorry, there's a lot of jargon that I forget. It's easy to get into it. But so the CONOPS, or the concept of operations, is basically, from a cyber standpoint, when you're going through those mission threads, from every discipline is looking at it for information of what they're going to be inputting into the next phase, which is the requirements. So if they see that we have a potential threat based on some kind of network that is going to be connected to your system, then in your requirements phase, you flow that down and you develop a requirement around that, and that becomes some cybersecurity level requirement. So the next phase after that is the design. So you're taking your requirements and you're coming up with the next specs, the next set of specs, and you're detailing, and you're doing your trade studies to identify how to build the system. And out of your trades, you should be able to build what you have. So, that is basically the right side of the V. When you get to the bottom, it's the implementation. So it's taking all the results of your trades, and, sometimes it's, what's the best IDS from a cybersecurity standpoint? How are we going to, exercise HPSS, or is HPSS the right tool? Or basically you've done trades that determines what you're going to be implementing from a cybersecurity standpoint, from a software standpoint, from a system standpoint, from a hardware standpoint, and that's the bottom of the V. So you're going to basically, from there, you've got your system built, you're going to start building it, put all the pieces together at the unit level, then build your subsystems, and then pull into your full system. And at each level, as you're going up the right side of the V, you're going to be testing and evaluating to make sure that each step, iteration, is what you need.
So let me try to explain this and see if I got it right. So concept of an operations might be you want to use a UAV to travel over a given territory and have it come back.
Mm-hmm.
So the mission threads would be, at some point in time, it's going to be sending back video along its route. Another point, it may be trying to intercept traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the threats would be, if it has to connect through a satellite, how that link could be disrupted.
Yep, communication channels, exactly.
If the information is coming back over the internet, how do you secure a virtual private network to that connection? If it has to use any type of non-DoD networks, or if it's going to use DoD networks, how does it make sure it stays within that? And those would be your mission threads. And the concept of operations, it goes out, does its mission, and comes back.
Yes.
And those mission threads could change. It could be over water at one time, it could be over land another time. It could be dropped from an airplane a third time. So you have to take all those into consideration. Is that how it works?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
And sometimes you can get you'll see the concept of operations displayed in a pictorial set of images and saying this is, you can follow the flow pictorially, or it's a description as such, but sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words as well. So I guess going into, I think I left off on the right side of the V. The right side of the V is our test and evaluation, and that's where we're verifying that we've built our system as we expect, based on the CONOPS, based on the requirements, based on the design, and that it actually meets the requirements and everything's consistent. So when you get to your final validation and you say, yes, I've got my system, it's complete, it's been fully validated. In addition to that, you have to have your ATO, which is your authorization to operate. So then you can go into your operational test and evaluation phase or test events. And all these will be scheduled, and I can get into that a little bit later. But really the objective is just ensuring from a cybersecurity standpoint going forward, is just ensuring that you have some kind of level of system resiliency. The reason to talk about the operational test and evaluation is because recently there was a new memorandum that came out that provided guidance and indicating that operational test and evaluation is now going to include cybersecurity on our programs. So, and a memorandum is really just guidance that is provided in our industry, and it typically identifies areas for improvement or change. And this one kind of came with a new change for us in the industry. So from my side, I usually deal with what happens within the V, and then our customer takes the product and runs it through operational test and evaluation. But we need to understand what's happening after it leaves our hands. So the whole purpose.
So will that memorandum find itself in bids for solicitation, or will it constrain funding for different projects? Do you know yet?
So we don't know yet, because it just came out this month.
Okay.
So we're just learning and kind of trying to swallow up all the information associated with it. But it's basically for any contracting company that's delivering a weapon system, a network, any kind of platform to the government. So it just basically it's ensuring now that it's doing the due diligence after the fact to make sure that it's also secure and cyber resilient with regard to its operational environment.
So the memorandum, what?
Sorry. So the memorandum, does it reference any standards like NIST standards or DoD standards for cybersecurity?
It talks a little bit about 8500-01, 8500-02. I didn't memorize them all, but I do know those two are specifically in there. So I don't have the answer as far as any other controls that it's referencing.
But it does reference them. That was really the
Oh, it
question.
does.
Yes
It
or
does.
no? Yeah, sorry.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And it's a follow-on to a previous operational test documentation. So it just says, here's what's new. So it's applicable because there is an instruction already out there that says for cybersecurity systems that we need to be ensuring that it's both secure and resilient, like I said before. And there's a focus area for this, and it's basically ensuring that the information resources are trustworthy, that the missions are ready for information resources to be degradation or loss within the mission, and then just making sure that our network operations have a means to prevail in the face of any kind of attack, so recovery. So we need to, at this point, be assessing how the systems are operating in the field, how the operators are using them, and then making sure that we can protect the system from anything that's out toward and attacking the system. So basically our testing is going to have to include, before we release it, to make sure that when they do their evaluation, that we've already done an evaluation for cybersecurity defenses and some level of identification of the vulnerabilities. We already do that in some respect with regard to scans, but just making sure that we need to add anything else to it. So that is where there's two assessments that the DoD has called out in their new memorandum. And those assessments are called the Cooperative Vulnerability and Penetration Assessment, as well as the Adversarial Assessment. And both of these results from these assessments are going to be informing the overall evaluation of operational effectiveness and the suitability and survivability. So these are going to feed that final report for the operational test and evaluation. There's going to be a few examinations on prevention. So that's basically the ability for the system to protect itself or protect the critical mission functions from cyber threats. Mitigation is the ability for it to be able to detect and then respond to those cyber threats and survive those attacks. And then the recovery. So are we losing out on any mission critical tasking? So can the system recover from attack once it's responded to and recovered, basically? So some pre-operational test and evaluation factors that are driving the scope is, we're looking at the operational context. What is the mission load? What are the missions being supported? And when we need to understand that, so that way we can have an idea for how to secure the system at the development stage, because the operational test environment is going to be making sure that these are the things that are being checked. So also the system extent and looking at any peripherals and similar devices that are going to be part of the system. So being able to plan for that and being able to make sure that prevention and the security against that is being designed into the system beforehand is going to be kind of a key thing for us to start doing and making sure any system unique attributes. So this is where we're going to look at the architecture and determine any key performance parameters, KPPs. I don't know if that's a familiar term for you guys, but it's kind of standard for us. And then measures of effectiveness, which are the MOEs. And just making sure that if we have those defined and making sure that we can meet those might even be released to the customer and say this is what we've developed against. So that way when they get to operational tests and evaluation, they know what to expect. So there might already be documentation released from the developer or the contractor that will flow through into the operational test and evaluation. And the other scope that we're going to be looking at going forward will be basically identifying cross-domain solutions, because that could be that's a specialized component. Not necessarily every system has it, because not every system needs a cross-domain solution, but that will come out of the CONOPS to determine if that's needed, and then we have to make sure that it works as we plan. And then that way when it gets to operational test and evaluation, it works based on how they're going to be challenging it. So, one of the main things is just planning. Basically, from the operational test part of it, the director is going to have to, there's a director of operational test and evaluation, and he's the one who's going to be providing all the approvals, reviewing the test plan specifics, and then also reviewing any tools that are going to be used. So he has the authority to say everything is good and in the final stage. Yes?
When you talk about cross-domain, are you talking about crossing between different security networks?
Yes,
Okay.
or even dealing with different levels of communications, as far as some might be on class versus classification. So and those actually are going to be their own networks in general, but it's going to be how do we manage that?
Okay.
So then just basically one of the informations that inform our operational test and evaluation is developmental test and evaluation. That kind of comes in prior to doing our OT and E. So that's the acronym for operational test and evaluation. Then there's DT and E. So DT and E comes first, then OT and E. But the DT and E allows us, the developers, to take those results and then make sure we can fix any mitigations or provide mitigations that are in the system prior to OT and E. So one of the misnomers, I think, within for some people is that OT and E is trying to get you, but you have a DT and E to allow you to be successful in OT and E. So developmental test and evaluation comes first, then you go into the operational test and evaluation. And the reason that we have so many cycles of test is so that way we can put out the best product possible. And that way, when we get to operational test and evaluation, it's just providing all the documentation, going through the tests, and being successful, because ideally the goal is to get these products out to the warfighter, because a lot of times they help them do their jobs and do it better and faster. So that's a little side note, but that's kind of where the DT comes from. It just kind of gives us another avenue to make sure that we are on track to be successful for operational testing and evaluation. And another consideration for planning is just making sure you have the resources. A lot of times these events are planned months in advance because you got to make sure you have the right people there. You have to make sure you have the environment set up. You may have to change locations because things may have changed. You may not have access to parts of the network you need at one location versus another. So making sure all this is done ahead of time is pretty key for planning. So one of the evaluations that they are requiring for the cybersecurity side during OT&E is the Cooperative Vulnerability and Penetration Assessment. And this can be, a standalone test. It can be a series of tests, or it can be part of an integrated test. So it really just depends on the system under test or that's being evaluated, how it's created and developed. The one important note for the CVPA, which is the Cooperative Vulnerability and Penetration Assessment, is that you can do it as early as possible, but within the right time frame for the next test, which is the adversarial assessment. Because if you do it too soon, some of the information that you collect and gather can become OBE by the time you get to the adversarial assessment.
And what does OBE mean?
Overcome by events, yes. Yeah, we use it so much. You forget what it stands for, I know. So
No, I'm just
I apologize.
No, that's okay. I'm familiar with the terms, that's on the asking.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate that. So the other part is, like I've mentioned a lot of things everything is documented. I know it's the hard part of a lot of the work we do is it's fun getting in there and tinkering, but then documenting what you did. So even with every phase and every aspect of the programs that we work on, everything has to be documented. So like all of our test plans and everything going forward, the CVPA is also being referenced in the TEMP, which is the Test and Evaluation Master Plan. So when you go into a program, that's going to be developed and it's going to have to identify a lot of information. I'll talk about what's in the TEMP a little bit later, but the CVPA is definitely going to be traceable to that master test plan that we have, or it's the Test and Evaluation Master Plan. But they basically, your temp is one of the documents that is going to be referencing and making sure that you've covered cybersecurity as part of your thought process. And then you have an operational test plan, and the operational test plan provides a little more detail, but the CVPA is also going to be part of the operational test plan as well. So the CVPA, it's going to be evaluated, and you have to consider, like I said, schedules and locations and making sure everybody's there. But then the system under test is going to have to also be in consideration, making sure it's configured correctly for the CVPA evaluation. And this is where you're going to be able to do, they're going to be doing a series of vulnerability scans on the system. So it's going to identify what the patching status is as well. And, you know, like I talked about the CVM cycle, which is our cyber vulnerability management cycle or maintenance cycle, this is where the patching and maintaining comes in. And before you release a system to test, you want to make sure that your posture is as good as possible. And that's kind of where the CVPA is going to be looking at, say, well, how well did you get it secured before you handed it off to us? And then it's also going to be doing some, like this name states, where there's going to be penetration testing. So we have to make sure our system is prepared for this penetration testing that's going to be happening. And the hope is that the data that comes from the CVPA, it's going to feed and inform the adversarial assessment, which is going to be in general sounding like a kind of a black box testing, but they're just going to throw what they can at it. And you're going, basically at that point, you're going to hope that you've secured it as practicable as possible. So the purpose of the adversarial assessment, or the AA, not Alcoholics Anonymous, but is to characterize the operational effects of the critical missions caused by some threat representative cyber activity. So this is where we have to make sure that the environment that it's being conducted in is representative of what we think it's going to be in the tactical network or in the environment that it's going to be used in. So the whole idea is to make sure that all of the tests that they're conducted, and the purpose to make sure that that system that you just created is not necessarily affected by the cyber attacks, and then the soldier or the warfighter can complete its mission using the product or the network or the platform that you've just created. So that's where the adversarial is going to be probably the most unknown for, I guess, folks like us, because we have not witnessed it. But if we have built the system to be as secure as possible, it should not be a problem. So again, resources for the AA is pretty much the same, making sure you have the right testers, the right evaluators. They brought in their toolkit to attack and beat up on the system. So there's a few players to consider. I've talked about the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, and he's going to be providing guidance and monitoring the test events. He's going to be reviewing and approving documentation that's going to be coming through based on the systems. And then there's the OTAs, and these are the operational test agencies. And they're going to be basically providing the documentation to the Director of the Operational Test and Evaluation. They'll also be providing a test concept to make sure that here is what we're going to be doing. And this is usually done in advance of our test execution. So, like I said, everything has to be planned and sequenced appropriately. The CVPA has to happen before the AA, and this is all part of the operational test and evaluation sequence. And all this happens way after we've walked through our systems V. So to kind of bring it all together there. And then the program managers, and these are the ones who are going to be providing the funding, because everything costs money. So they also provide the TEMP, which is the Test and Evaluation Master Plan, and that's going to be assessed by the OTAs, the Operational Test Agencies, and the Director, the DOT. So basically, all the documentation flows to the person who makes the decision. The results of the testing flows to the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation as well. So the reason for doing all this is because you have to have a paper trail. So at least that's kind of my perspective of it. And you don't want to do anything without documenting it. So that test and evaluation master plan, it, from a high level, defines your strategy. It identifies resources that are going to be used for test or that have been used for test. And then the operational test plan is how the test is actually conducted. It defines your test environment, what makes it an operational test environment, and any simulators you may have to do because there's not always a case where there's not a case where you have a perfect system. And at some cases you're like, I don't have this piece, I need to substitute or simulate it in one way or another to feed, it might be some kind of communication link. You just don't know, but you have to be able to have those mitigations in place prior to testing. The other aspect and information that is key inside the operational test plan is how do you set back your system to a baseline before it had started to get beat on by the testers. So how do you basically revert back and make sure you have a clean system once it's been attacked? And then, like I said, test data and being aware of how to collect the data, what needs to be collected, what format it needs to be delivered in, and what to expect. So all that data does have a timeline as far as when it needs to be delivered and say that to indicate that the testing is complete. So the cyber security part of it is just a piece of the operational test and evaluation, but it's now been highlighted as something that is a focus area. Some other information that the temp is going to have is going to have the architecture, your system architecture, your product architecture will be in there and included. You might have a timeline of what it will take to conduct any testing, any resources that will be needed for testing. The operational environment, it'll be, in that you'll be identifying your attack surfaces for the system under test as well. And then temp will also be referencing the CVPA and the adversarial assessment. So, everything ties together, everything becomes linked, and that's kind of how it is. If you pull a string, you can get all the way back to the beginning of developing the CONOPS. So, in closing, because I'm starting to get choked up here, so emotional. I just want to thank you guys for your time and listening. But considering that there's some numbers are really cool for me. The cybersecurity field, which is what I'm assuming you guys are interested in, is wide open and there's lots of opportunities. But the demographics are kind of staggering right now. So 1 in 10 cybersecurity professionals are women. So I'm 1 in 10. 1 in 10 cybersecurity professionals are either African American, Latino, or Asian. So I'm 1 in 10. But there is such a huge gap and a huge need for cybersecurity professionals right now. I think globally there's about 1 million unfilled positions. So keep studying, keep doing what you're doing, because by 2021, if we don't start filling those positions, it's going to be about 3 million. I can tell you that our cyber team just hired and filled 4 positions. So I think we're hopefully closing that gap, 1 million jobs, and we have 5 requisitions out to get 5 more people within our cybersecurity team. So I really encourage you guys to take every opportunity you can within the cybersecurity field, because I think the sky is the limit, and there's so much you can do within it. And it's not always DoD. It's across every industry, and it's important to just about everything we touch these days. So before I can't talk anymore, I'm going to conclude. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
If Raytheon is the prime on a contract that this memorandum applies, will they be able to trickle that down to the subcontractors, or will basically Raytheon will be the main?
So we don't. I don't really have a good answer for that, because I know we don't necessarily have on some of the programs I'm working on. We don't have subs. We are the prime, or we are the sub. So it's up to us to make sure that we are preparing for this. I can tell you that in my history of working on a program that did have a sub, we did try and help them prepare as best as possible for OT&E, and to take in, considerations that we felt were requirements for, a successful delivery. And so I have a feeling that it'll probably be levied, and flowed down just based on that. But there's only so much you can do within your subs, especially if it's not written into the contract initially. So because this just came out, it may not affect things that, things yet, or programs yet, until maybe we go into new development. But at that point in time, you can levy on the primes and say, here's what we are looking forward to. And I say looking forward, meaning forward-looking, not necessarily we're happy about it. So.
And it's also an interesting question how much these existing projects can still be changed.
Yes,
just adding security
absolutely.
on as an afterthought is
because
likely.
When you're doing agile development, you can flow back new requirements a lot more easily. And in programs that don't have the cybersecurity baked in, I think that's a challenge. But if there's updates being made, then you can probably trickle it in there. And I think as long as you're upfront and with the customer and letting them know, hey, this is a requirement and this is why we're doing it, and you have that relationship, it's all possible.
I'm going to be working with Northrop Grumman over the summer, unfortunately. But I've been.
Well, they're gonna be beholden to this as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I had a more general question regarding working with DoD and stuff like that. The Snowden documents have been pretty revelatory in the fact that the DoD seems to be pretty happy with using weapons that have been designed for foreign adversaries to be used against American citizens. What is your thought on that, and how is that? How can you kind of square that circle of potentially the stuff that you are working on right now, potentially making their way into other agencies' hands?
So first of all, I have not read them because I think I think there's a requirement for us to go out to like WikiLeaks, because that can we'd have to self-report and self-disclose, because if you hold a clearance, we don't look at things that we probably shouldn't be looking at. But I think what you're asking is, how can I reconcile the ability that we're developing weapons that can be used against our own citizens? I reconcile it with the fact that the products that I know that I'm working on are for, I understand what the end user is going to be doing with them. So nothing that I've touched at this point has been, could be weaponized against our people, our soldiers. So I can deconflict it that way, I suppose. At this point in time, I haven't worked, everything I've worked on has been a little lower technology, I guess, so to speak. So that's, I guess, how I've been able to reconcile it. I can tell you, I've talked to pilots who've used some of the products I've worked on, and they either like them or they don't, and they give us the feedback about what they don't like about them, what they do. So that's helpful. I know that just having that sense of being able to talk to some of our customers and the end users about the products we've put in their hands, and how it's made some of their jobs easier, I think helps me. Also knowing that I have a brother in the Marines, and he is a Marine reservist, and he's actually talks to me about some of the tools and equipment he uses that he can discuss with me. And it feels good, because I know that companies like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, are basically assisting our soldiers in when they're in the tactical environments. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
It's probably not as satisfactory, but I tend to when they have WikiLeaks stuff, I don't go out there, because no matter how curious I am, it might be a conflict of interest for my own work.
Other questions? Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for coming on Dead Week.